He sat down on the edge of the bed. Both of her brothers were on the floor of the apartment, bleeding. One of them, Gianni, had already gone still on the couch where he'd been sitting. The other, Jaheim, had run toward his sister, trying to put his own body between her and the gun, and had collapsed directly on top of her when the bullets caught him. Antwan Carter sat on the edge of that bed, the Glock still in his hand or still in his pocket, and he looked at the woman he had been with for 4 years, the woman whose brothers he had just killed in front of her, and he said 4 words, "See what you made me." That sentence is now part of the official arrest report filed by the Miami Police Department. It is one of the most psychologically revealing statements documented in any case this channel has covered, because it is not an expression of grief or panic or horror at what had just happened. It is an accusation. It is the final move in a pattern of blame shifting that domestic violence researchers have documented for decades, deployed in the exact moment that should have produced the opposite response from any person capable of recognizing what they had just done. Jaheim Pierre was 23 years old. Gianni Pierre was 28. They went to that apartment on Northwest 17th Avenue in Liberty City, Miami, for one reason. They wanted to check on their sister. They had a documented history of concern about her relationship with Antwan Carter, a history that involved previous domestic violence between the couple. They went there to look after her, the way brothers do, the way family is supposed to. Neither of them walked out alive. Welcome to the Crime Files TV. This channel covers the stories from Black American communities that deserve to be told completely, with the victims at the center and the full weight of the evidence treated with the respect it demands. Subscribe now if you are not already here. This case is just weeks old, and it is one of the most painful illustrations this channel has documented of what happens when the people who love a domestic violence survivor try to intervene directly. This is the full story of Jaheim and Gianni Pierre. Now let's go back to the beginning. Jaheim and Gianni Pierre were brothers, 23 and 28 years old respectively, from the Liberty City community in Miami, Florida. Liberty City is one of the most historically significant Black neighborhoods in South Florida, a community with deep roots, a long and complicated history shaped by segregation-era housing policy, and a present-day identity built around family, faith, and the kind of close-knit social fabric that the Pierre family story illustrates with painful clarity. At the candlelight vigil held for the brothers in the days after their deaths, relatives and neighbors gathered with balloons and quiet prayers, and what they kept returning to, in the words used to describe Jaheim and Gianni, was faith and fierce loyalty. Those two qualities, faith and fierce loyalty, are not separate traits in the way the community spoke about them. They are connected. The brothers' loyalty to their sister was, by every account given at that vigil, an expression of the same values that shaped their faith. The belief that family looks out for family, that you show up when someone you love might be in danger, regardless of what that showing up might cost you. Their sister had been in a relationship with Antwan Carter for approximately 4 years. Carter was 31 years old. The relationship, according to the arrest report later filed by Miami police, had a documented history of previous domestic violence. That phrase, used directly by investigators to explain why Jaheim and Gianni came to the apartment that day, establishes something critical to understanding everything that followed. This was not the first time concern about Carter's treatment of their sister had reached a level that required some form of response from her family. There was a pattern. There was history. And on May 2, 2026, that history brought 2 brothers to an apartment near Northwest 17th Avenue specifically to check on her. Specifically because they were worried. Specifically because 4 years of whatever had unfolded inside that relationship had reached a point where showing up in person felt necessary. What happened inside that apartment, reconstructed from the arrest report, surveillance footage reviewed by investigators, and Carter's own statements to detectives, unfolded across a sequence that moved from an argument to a temporary calm to a returned threat to a shooting, in the span of what appears to have been less than an hour. The brothers arrived at the apartment around midday. At some point after their arrival, an argument developed between Jaheim and his sister. According to the arrest report, that argument escalated, and Jaheim struck Carter, who had stepped in during the dispute between Jaheim and his sister. This detail matters significantly to the full picture of what happened, because it establishes that the first physical confrontation in this sequence involved Jaheim and Carter, arising out of a family disagreement that Carter inserted himself into. Whatever the content of that initial argument between Jaheim and his sister, Carter's decision to step in transformed a family conversation into a physical confrontation between him and one of the brothers who had come specifically because of concerns about his treatment of her. In the aftermath of that physical altercation, the sister left the apartment. She went to ask a neighbor to call the police, recognizing in that moment that the situation inside her home had become dangerous enough to require outside intervention. When she returned to the apartment, Carter was gone. She locked the door behind her. Surveillance footage that investigators later reviewed showed exactly where Carter had gone during that window. He left the apartment, walked to his car, and retrieved an object, which he placed in his right pocket. That object was a 9mm Glock handgun. The surveillance footage, combined with the timeline established by the arrest report, makes clear that Carter's departure from the apartment was not a withdrawal from the conflict. It was a tactical retreat to arm himself before returning. He came back. According to the arrest report and according to the surveillance footage reviewed by police, Carter paced back and forth outside the locked apartment door. He banged on it. He yelled. Investigators documented his exact words. "I bet one of you won't open up." Inside the apartment, the sister heard the banging. She heard the yelling. She understood, with whatever specific dread that moment produced, exactly what was happening outside that door, and she told her brothers not to open it. That instruction, "Do not open the door," represents the precise moment in this entire sequence where the danger was most clearly understood and most directly named by the person who knew Antwan Carter best, who had lived with him for 4 years, who had the most complete understanding of exactly what he was capable of when he was outside a locked door demanding entry after retrieving a gun from his car. Jaheim Pierre opened the door anyway. We do not know, and the public record does not tell us, exactly what calculation or instinct led Jaheim to make that decision in that specific moment, with his sister telling him not to. Perhaps he believed that confronting Carter directly, face to face, was the only way to resolve what was happening. Perhaps he believed, as people sometimes do in the seconds before violence, that they cannot fully anticipate, that the danger outside the door was less severe than it actually was. Perhaps the specific masculine framework of protection that had brought him to that apartment in the first place, the instinct to stand between danger and the people you love, compelled him to meet that danger directly, rather than wait behind a locked door. Whatever the reason, Jaheim opened the door, and Antwan Carter began firing immediately. Gianni Pierre was sitting on the couch when the shooting started. He was struck by gunfire in that position, without the chance to move, without the chance to understand fully what was happening before it had already happened to him. Jaheim, after being shot, did something that the arrest report documents with specific and devastating clarity. He ran toward his sister. He was trying to reach her, to put himself between her and whatever was still coming. The same instinct that had brought both brothers to that apartment in the first place, now compressed into the final seconds of Jaheim's life. He collapsed on top of her when the bullets caught him completely. Their sister was now physically covered in the blood of both of her brothers, one of whom had died trying to shield her with his own body in the final act of his life. Neighbor Gina Kirk told investigators she was woken by the sound of gunfire. She heard 5 gunshots, followed by the sound of a door slamming beneath her balcony. That detail, 5 distinct gunshots audible to a neighbor through the walls and floors of an apartment building, establishes the sustained and repeated nature of the shooting in a way that goes beyond what the written arrest report alone communicates. 5 shots is not the sound of a single, instantaneous act. It represents a sustained period of gunfire directed into a room containing the sister Carter claimed to love and the 2 brothers who had come specifically because they were worried about her safety. After the shooting stopped, Antwan Carter sat down at the edge of a bed inside the apartment. According to the arrest report, he looked at the woman he had been with for 4 years, the woman covered now in her brother's blood, and he said, "See what you made me." There is no way to fully account for the psychological architecture required to produce that sentence in that specific moment. It is the final and most extreme expression of a pattern that domestic violence researchers and advocates describe with painful familiarity: externalized blame, the consistent reframing of an abusive partner's own violent choices as something the victim caused, as something that exists in the realm of consequence rather than in the realm of decision. Carter did not say, "I am sorry." He did not say, "What have I done?" He looked at the woman whose brothers he had just killed in front of her and told her that she had made him do it. The sister left the apartment after Carter said those words. According to the arrest report, after Carter was eventually placed in a police cruiser, officers were approached by a woman whose feet and clothes were covered in blood. She told them that her brothers were the ones who had been shot. That image, a woman walking barefoot, drenched in the blood of her two brothers, telling police officers what had just happened to the people she loved most, is one of the most visceral and devastating pieces of documentation in the entire public record of this case. Officers had arrived at the apartment to find Antwan Carter pacing back and forth. He told them directly, without hesitation or evasion, "I'm the one. I have the firearm." Officers searched him and found a 9mm Glock in his right pocket. He was detained at the scene. Detectives subsequently interviewed Carter, and what he told them represents the foundation of the legal defense his attorneys would build in the months that followed. Carter said that after the initial confrontation, he had left the apartment to get a breath of fresh air. He said he returned only to retrieve his wallet and his keys. He said that when he entered the apartment, Jaheim and Gianni squared up with both fists in the air, ready to fight again, and that this is what led him to fire his weapon. This account, offered by Carter to detectives, requires examination against the documented sequence of events established by surveillance footage and the arrest report. Surveillance footage showed Carter retrieving an object from his car, specifically the firearm, and placing it in his pocket, a detail that complicates any account framing his departure as simply stepping outside for fresh air. The footage also showed him pacing and banging on the door, yelling that he bet one of them wouldn't open up, behavior that is difficult to reconcile with an account centered on simply retrieving forgotten personal items. And the specific timeline, in which the sister explicitly told her brothers not to open the door because of what she could hear and sense happening outside it, suggests that the danger Carter represented in that moment was understood, in real time, by the person who knew him best, in a way that contradicts the defensive framing he offered investigators after the fact. Carter was initially booked on first-degree murder charges. Following further investigation and legal proceedings, the charges were adjusted to 2 counts of second-degree murder. He has pleaded not guilty to both counts. A Miami-Dade Circuit Court judge, Lodi Jean, set a tentative trial date for August 17, 2026. At a hearing related to that scheduling, loved ones of the Pierre brothers attended via Zoom, a detail that speaks to both the ongoing emotional weight this case carries for the family and the practical realities of how grieving families now participate in legal proceedings remotely, watching the process unfold from screens, rather than always being physically present in the courtroom. Let's talk directly about what this case represents in the broader landscape of intimate partner violence intervention, because the specific tragedy of Jaheim and Gianni Pierre's deaths illustrates one of the most painful and least discussed dimensions of domestic violence response. They did exactly what advocates, in some contexts, encourage concerned family members to do. They showed up. They checked on their sister. They did not wait passively for a crisis to resolve itself or hope that things would improve without direct involvement. And that direct involvement, in this specific case, against this specific man, with a documented history of domestic violence and access to a firearm, produced the worst possible outcome. This does not mean that family intervention in domestic violence situations is inherently dangerous, or that concerned relatives should not check on loved ones they believe may be at risk. The overwhelming majority of such interventions do not end in violence. But this case illustrates, with painful specificity, why domestic violence advocates consistently recommend that family intervention be paired with professional support and safety planning, rather than direct, unaccompanied confrontation, particularly when the abusive partner is known to have access to weapons or a documented history of escalating violence. Jaheim and Gianni went to that apartment because they loved their sister and were worried about her. They did not have the benefit of a structured safety plan, professional guidance, or law enforcement presence at the moment they arrived. What they had was love, loyalty, and the specific courage that family intervention requires. It was not enough to protect them, because Antwan Carter chose to leave, retrieve a weapon, and return. The decision Carter made to leave the apartment and go specifically to his car is the single most important fact in establishing the deliberate nature of what followed. A person reacting in the heat of an uncontrolled moment does not have the presence of mind to walk calmly to a vehicle, retrieve a firearm, place it in a pocket, and then return to confront the people he had just been in conflict with. That sequence requires a pause. It requires a decision. It requires, in the specific legal language that the prosecution will present at trial, the kind of premeditated action that the law treats with greater severity than a purely impulsive act of violence. The specific phrase Carter used while banging on that door, "I bet one of you won't open up," is itself a statement that anticipates, and even invites, the violent outcome that followed. It is not the language of someone seeking to de-escalate or resolve a conflict peacefully. It is a taunt delivered to people who were sheltering inside a locked room, specifically because his sister, the person who knew him best, had judged that locking the door was necessary for their safety. Jaheim Pierre was 23 years old. He ran toward his sister in the final seconds of his life, trying to give her the same protection he had come to that apartment to provide in the first place. He collapsed on top of her, and in doing so, he became the last physical barrier between his sister and the man who had already killed his brother. Gianni Pierre was 28 years old. He was sitting on a couch in his sister's home, present specifically because he was concerned for her well-being, when he was shot without warning and without the chance to defend himself or move. Both brothers were remembered by their community at a vigil held with balloons and quiet prayers in the days following their deaths, for their faith and their fierce loyalty. Those qualities are not abstractions in this case. They are the specific and documented reasons that Jaheim and Gianni Pierre were in that apartment on May 2, 2026, at all. They went because they loved their sister. They went because 4 years of concern about her relationship with Antwan Carter had produced a moment where showing up in person felt necessary. And they paid for that loyalty with their lives. Their sister survived. She is alive, and she carries with her now not only the trauma of having witnessed both of her brothers shot in front of her, one of them dying as he tried to shield her body with his own, but also the specific and cruel accusation that Antwan Carter directed at her in the immediate aftermath. See what you made me. Whatever the legal proceedings ultimately determine about Carter's culpability for the deaths of Jaheim and Gianni Pierre, that sentence belongs entirely to him. It was his decision to leave the apartment, his decision to retrieve the firearm, his decision to return, to bang on the door, to fire when it opened. The sister who locked that door, who told her brothers not to open it, who understood the danger more clearly than anyone else in that building, made no decision that produced what happened. She made the decision to try to protect everyone, including herself, by keeping that door closed. It was Jaheim who chose to open it, out of the same loyalty and protective instinct that had brought him there in the first place. And it was Antwan Carter who chose, every step of the way, what came next. A GoFundMe page created by the Pierre family in the aftermath of the shooting has provided a public space for the community to express what the brothers meant to the people who knew them. Messages from relatives and neighbors describe two young men whose lives were cut short far too soon, whose connection to their family was deep and consistent, and whose final act, for both of them, was an attempt to protect someone they loved. The trial of Antwan Carter is scheduled for August 17, 2026. He faces 2 counts of second-degree murder. The specific question his defense will need to address, given the surveillance footage of him retrieving a weapon from his car and the documented sequence of his return to the apartment, is how a self-defense framing can be reconciled with evidence that he left specifically to arm himself before coming back to a door that had been locked against him, banging on it, and declaring that he bet one of the people inside wouldn't open up. If you or someone you know has concerns about a family member's safety in a relationship with a documented history of domestic violence, please consider reaching out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233 for guidance on safety planning before direct intervention. The hotline can help families navigate exactly the kind of difficult, loving impulse that brought Jaheim and Gianni Pierre to that apartment, with the professional support and strategic planning that can make intervention safer for everyone involved. The hotline is free, confidential, and available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, by call, text, and chat at thehotline.org. Subscribe to the Crime Files TV. Share this video for Jaheim, for Gianni, for their sister, who lost 2 brothers in the time it takes to fire 5 shots, and who will carry the weight of an accusation that was never hers to bear. And for every family who has ever felt the specific, urgent pull to check on someone they love, knowing the risk, and choosing to show up anyway. They went there out of love. He met them with a gun, and then he told her it was her fault.